This video is a brief case study on whether Donald Trump proved to be an imperial president or not. On the surface, Donald Trump is the antithesis of what the Founding Fathers intended the president to be. The Founding Fathers were deeply suspicious of the power of the executive, and that is why they sought to provide checks on the president's power at every reasonable turn. Donald Trump and his character is not necessarily built for limited authority. This is someone who ruled over a business empire and hired and fired contestants on The Apprentice at will. And his presidency proved to be a radical shift away from conventional American politics, and he certainly redefined the debate surrounding the imperial presidency. So what we're going to do is look at Trump's behaviours, Trump's actions, and see whether or not they buy into this theory that the president has become imperial. This cover of Time magazine was produced in June 2018, and it was quite striking at the time. And what's interesting is what was going on when this was produced. This was when President Trump was making quite public attacks on Twitter of Robert Mueller, who was a special counsel who was investigating the extent of Russian interference into the 2016 presidential election. And of course, Trump saw it as an attempt to delegitimize his 2016 victory. And the artist that has created the front cover is suggesting that this is how Trump sees himself, an all-powerful figure. We're going to look at three elements of Trump's attempts to become an imperial president. First of all, executive orders. Secondly, his declaration of a national emergency on the southern border. And finally, his use of Twitter. So first up, Trump passed 220 executive orders. And remember that these declarations are signed at the whim of the president without the need for negotiation or working with Congress. In his first day in office, he signed an executive order which saw America leave the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a 12-nation trade deal that President Obama had previously signed the United States up to. Secondly, he declared a national emergency on the border wall. In February 2019, he announced this national emergency, and he intended to free up $8 billion worth of funding for the building of a border wall on the southern border, which had previously been denied by Congress. What's interesting here, that of the 58 previous national emergency declarations by a US president, none had ever sought to reallocate funding that had previously been denied by Congress. So, the announcement came in February 19 of the declaration of a national emergency, but in September 2019, a joint resolution of Congress sought to overturn that decision to declare a national emergency. Now, they were simple majority votes. There was a majority of Democrats in the House at the time, and so it was unsurprising to see a majority of the House vote for this, but there was some Republican bipartisanship in that vote too. But in a 54-41 vote, the Senate also voted to declare that the national emergency on the southern border should be reversed. In October 2019, Trump used his presidential veto for the first time to veto that joint resolution. So the national emergency lasted for 12 months, but it was extended by Trump in February 2020, and then again in January 2021, just 2 days before he left office. One of President Biden's first actions as president was to reverse and end the declaration of a national emergency on the southern border, and he did so in his first day in office. The next thing I want to talk about is Donald Trump's use of Twitter. First of all, we'll look at foreign policy, then we'll look at hiring and firing, and then we'll talk about something entirely different altogether. So, Donald Trump was quite keen to use Twitter and the platform to share with his voter base and his supporters what his intentions for office were. He had 13 million followers on Twitter before becoming president, and those numbers only grew in the early years of his presidency. And you can see there some of the things that Trump was saying. We'll start with Mexico at the top. He talks about if Mexico is unable to stop the onslaught, I will close the southern border. He also, in other tweets, referred to Mexico, which is historically a nation with a close relationship to the United States because of its proximity to it. He referred to Mexico as not our friend and later an enemy of the United States. He also, you can see there, blamed China for the spread of COVID-19. So you can see, first of all, he referred to it in the first tweet as the Chinese virus. You can see also there that other tweets were taken off Twitter. They were deplatformed because they were found to have violated the platform's rules, particularly regarding the spreading of misinformation. You can also see, though, that in 2020, Trump sometimes used Twitter to improve relations with regards to foreign policy. You can see there that he talks about China's working very hard to contain the coronavirus, and he made a public declaration of thanks to President Xi. Two more tweets I want to point to into sort of your direction. Trump had a lot of turnover in his cabinet. And quite often people found out about their positions in cabinet through Twitter. Mike Pompeo found out that he was becoming the Secretary of State via Twitter, but Rex Tillerson also found out that he had been sacked via Twitter. So in March 2018, Rex Tillerson found out when Donald Trump tweeted, "Thank you to Rex Tillerson for his service." That was the first he heard that he was being fired. Tillerson was later attacked by Trump later in the year. Rex Tillerson didn't have the mental capacity to be Secretary of State, but as quite often with many of Trump's former advisors, Tillerson and Trump had a personal fallout, which led to some quite distasteful comments about each other's intelligence. Finally, when we're talking about the actions of imperial presidents, foreign policy was not just something that Trump would rant about on Twitter. Let's talk about the assassination of an Iranian Major General, Qasem Soleimani, who was assassinated at Baghdad airport in Iraq on the orders of Donald Trump without the notification of Congress, never mind the consent of Congress through a vote. And this possibly fits in with the concept that there are two presidencies when we consider the imperial and the imperiled presidency, domestic issues and foreign policy. He hired Ivanka Trump, his daughter, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to be two of his closest advisors. And again, this shows that Trump seemed to want to run the Oval Office in the way that he had run his business by hiring family members to work closely with him, despite them having no political experience previously. There are also some worrying comments that Trump made about the powers of the president more generally. In 2018, he tweeted that he had the absolute right to pardon himself, and his critics suggested that Donald Trump believed that he was above the law. During the COVID-19 pandemic in the early months, he claimed that he had, and I quote, total authority over state governments, which seemed to fly in the face of federalism on which the American system of government is built. Now, eventually, Trump allowed individual state governments to respond to the crisis, but it seemed to go against his natural inclination to take full control himself. Now, that is not to say that Trump had things all his own way. What were the key checks on Trump? Well, first of all, Congress, especially when the Democrats won the House in the 2018 midterms. And in a period of divided government, he faced opposition, as we can see with the national emergency, back and forth over the southern border. Also, the reserved powers of the states was preserved during COVID-19. He had to climbed down from his threat to have total authority over state government policy. So those reserved powers of the states were maintained as in keeping with the Constitution. He is, of course, the first and only president to be impeached not once but twice in the House, which again gave the House the ability to provide its check on the president's actions when it's believed that he has acted beyond the limits of his powers. And then finally, the political system in America prevailed. After the 2020 election, Donald Trump made what have been widely debunked claims that the election had been rigged and stolen from him. He made many legal challenges and consistently failed to overturn the result of the election in Georgia, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. And so, despite Donald Trump's lack of respect and lack of recognition for the result of the 2020 election, American democracy prevailed. However, the elephant in the room is Trump himself. At the time of recording this video, he is almost certainly set to become the Republican nominee for the presidency, despite the myriad of court cases that he faces. And I just want to point to one comment that he made in December of 2023. In an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News, Trump was given the opportunity to dispel any fears that Trump was an authoritarian. Sean Hannity asked Trump whether he wanted to respond to those allegations that he would rule as a dictator. Trump's response: "I'll be a dictator on day one." And what he meant is that he would be a dictator in the terms of his policies to sort of set America straight, so to speak, and then return to respectfully living by the wording of the Founding Fathers and the American Constitution. But here we have a candidate for the presidency of the United States claiming to be a dictator, even albeit for one day only. This seems to fly in the face of the intentions of the Founding Fathers, who wanted to limit the executive's authority.